My name is Iman Shabazz. I am the CEO and founder of Maximum Impact LLC. As a teenager, I was a student at Richmond Community High School. One of the things that was noticed at the school for quote-unquote academically and gifted and talented students was the highest percentage of students who were failing were young African boys. And so there were two instructors who recognized that and took it upon themselves to try to do something to assemble, all of us together at the time. We called it the Black Male Seminar or something to that effect. And there would be different people who would come in and speak, and they would, share what information and experience that they had. Self-esteem and the aspects of self-knowledge, self-love and respect, self-discipline and self-confidence. I grew as one of the leaders within the organization and started developing a real clear sense of the purpose and need for organizing. Like many people who may have been familiar with Kwame Ture just from his work in the context of the civil rights movement, I was really, I'll use the term blown away, to say the least, by his ability to deal with a lot of scholarly information and to really deal with our people's history, but to then relate to our people in a real, very casual, normal context. And I got my feet wet, if you will, between Richmond and the streets of DC when it came to community organizing. I did everything from a live call-in television show, radio show. I wrote for several well-published, periodicals. And then, of course, met what I feel were some of the giants and pioneers of our struggle in a way that, that's never left me, man. As an organizer, on the one hand, many of us are aware of the different issues that face our people. Poverty, transportation, housing, quote-unquote education, I'll come back to that, so-called criminal justice, and the like. But it's important to understand that even if we are able to make gains quantitatively in various ways in relationship to those different issues, at some point we have to really deal with what's happening systemically at its core. And my position has always been that that core has to fundamentally be dismantled. We really have to dismantle it and develop something structurally or systemically that works for our people, that's developed by our people. We are going to define for ourselves what that system of governance, what that mode of operation, what the systems of distribution of wealth and development and growth of that wealth need to look like, and how we ultimately take care of ourselves as people. I guess if I'm choosing two, I'll choose the one that I work in a primary context, and that is dealing with the criminal legal system, really trying to transform the criminal legal system. And when I'm working from 9 to 5, my focus is on transforming some aspects of the criminal legal system, really just creating a new lens for what we call justice. Community members genuinely controlling the direction and the framework, if you will, of what that model looks like. So maybe it no longer is called policing. Maybe it's another form of community justice. How we choose to resolve conflicts? How do we choose to, for other purposes, hold each other accountable in ways that enrich the community and not just focus on what we are attempting to do to so-called punish an individual. I would argue that the other area in its broadest sense really is bringing more awareness to the racial components in relationship to the oppression, if you will, that we suffer from. We'll talk about oppression, but we don't want to talk about racism. We'll talk about, the economic disparities, but we don't want to talk about the racism that's attached. We want to pretend that for whatever reason or another, race is not an undercurrent in the context of why these disparities exist in the first place. We're talking about global systems that have been in place and have been afforded to exist for hundreds of years in a way that have been unimpeded by any real, systemic challenges, to the way that they function. racialized lens, if you will, I think becomes really important, because now that people are at least saying, because I don't know if I believe it fully, but at least saying that they have some understanding now or appreciation now for the racial disparity that we've been pointing out for at least all of our lifetimes and beyond. They have some understanding of those things and really want to sit down and, you know, have the conversation, have the hard conversations, the tough conversations. When we talk about having hard conversations or uncomfortable conversations, it can't just be at the expense of what white folk are uncomfortable and what white folk are not. Or it can't even be at the expense of what political leaders are and what political leaders are not. You know, it really has to be in a context that suggests that not only are we willing to have real dialogue about it, but that we're willing to do something immediately in order to change that in the context of whatever area we work in. Yeah, man, those I think would be the two areas that I'd highlight, at least in terms of what my work intersects with right now. But I think that it's really important for us to examine this whole notion of racial equity in general. Equity really isn't my aim. My aim is power. I'm very interested in empowering African people where we've been disempowered for so long. But to talk about equity just in a general context, when we know that the, you know, as people say, the playing field isn't leveled, I think that does a disservice to what the needs are. When I answer the question of what does winning look like, it looks like our people being empowered. We have to really understand, and what does that mean in terms of what our place in the world is as African people, and how do we develop our relationship to a worldview in and of itself. Like we can't just see ourselves as a microcosm of people of African descent that live in, you know, misnamed America or live in Richmond, you know, for that matter. We have to see ourselves in a global context in order to be able to understand then, well, what does it mean for me to be able to produce my own food, produce my own systems of healthcare, produce my own ability to teach the young people within our community, and to create the types of jobs or entrepreneurial opportunities in order to gain the resources to genuinely build wealth and to circulate that in a real context. We play this game where we talk about, people use this term, the lesser of two evils, or the lesser of whatever amount of evils that there is. And I just think that that's so stupid. The truth is evil doesn't get us to liberation, period. Period. It doesn't get us there, period. When I talk about empowering African people, I'm really talking about community building. I'm really talking about, as you mentioned earlier in our conversation, nation building, family building. I'm talking about building those institutions that are important at a level that we don't necessarily always think about, but that are vital to really being able to position us to be able to reach our liberation as a people. You know, not just me get mine and, you know, I got the bag, as they say, and, you know, I can roll through the hood and whatever the new nice whip is, and, you know, and everybody, you know, hate on me about that or be proud of it, whichever the case is. But no, we're talking about empowerment so that we are eradicating the levels of poverty that exist. We're eradicating this notion that it has to exist in a concentrated manner that affects our people at the level that it does. I'm not talking about something that just benefits a handful of people that we can parade around, or that we can then misteach our young people to look up to and say that, see, you could be that. You know, one of these days that could be you. No, we're not talking about that nonsense. We're talking about nation building, community building, family building, and developing and fortifying, the family structure in a way that we build whole and healthy African families that in turn contribute to a collective African community. My first answer to that is always organize, 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 organize. And not just to sound like a parrot of Kwame Ture, but to be real clear that we cannot do any of this by ourselves. And I mean real organization. I don't mean just getting people hyped up to come together and rally or do whatever the case is, but I'm talking about genuinely organizing our people, strengthening people's education and awareness to a point where they take on the work themselves, to really take the opportunity to start expressing themselves, because in so many spaces that's suppressed. People aren't really given an opportunity to share, well, this is what my lived experience is, and this is why, I may not be able to break down these crazy terms that y'all are using, scientific socialism and all this other crap, but I know what I'm experiencing on a daily basis, and this is what's happening to me. Do we have the power to do something? Yes. Okay, well, what is it? How do we come together and figure out if we gon', for lack of a better term, we gonna roll on the system, then what does that look like? And are we only talking about in a political context, or are there other ways for us to be able to organize and really be able to leverage our power to, bring about change? I think that our responsibility as revolutionaries is, as Kwame Ture used to always say, to refer back to him again, our responsibility is to push them as far to the left as possible. I've got my own issues with this whole notion of left and right and whatever that's supposed to mean. But the point being is if we push them further and further towards revolutionary thought and revolutionary action, then we create, the mass body that's really going to do the work that pushes us towards the liberatory end. What are the tactics that we need to employ in order to be able to lay out a plan or lay out a strategy that is going to not just move a needle, but that's really going to transform our material conditions, that's really going to transform the way that our people live on a daily basis, and that's really going to transform our ability to reach our potential as human beings? We have to read and study, and we can't add to the discourse if the only thing we know is the consciousness of oppression that brought us to the table to start the dialogue in the first place. We have to be able to inform our different positions in a much better way. But I think that ultimately, if anyone, any individual is serious about affecting the racial reality in the context of oppressed people within this city, within this society, within this country, within this world, then somewhere along the lines, we're going to have to be honest about creating the space for us to deal with what that means for our individual groups, and being clear about what we're demanding, or developing those demands together, and developing a sense of what we will have to in turn take in order to be able to reach, those levels of liberation that I think that are so critical to the sustained life of people of African descent around the world.